G'day everyone. Well, it has been a considerable break since I did my last thought for the week. In fact, the last time I wrote an article, I actually wrote about the thing that I wanted to speak to you about today, and I never did a video. It seems that on that weekend back in February, my opportunity to do the video was overwhelmed by busyness, and it didn't get done. And so the next weekend, which had a good deal on, I didn't get to follow it up. And then it occurred to me that maybe I could go for a couple of weeks just to get some fresh thoughts in my mind. And I forgot that I had written this article. And then obviously one thing led to another, and in the end it became easier and easier just to put it off till next week. Well, here we are, some considerable months later, and I am thinking it is time to get started again. The reason that I particularly wanted to get started again is because I have started a postgraduate degree, a Master of Philosophy, that, all going well, will become the first piece of my PhD this time next year. And so the way that it works is you give an entry into the program, the MPhil program, and then if you've demonstrated the capacities enough, you are invited into the PhD program, and all the work that you've done in the MPhil converts across to the PhD. So that's the process I'm in now. But it seemed to me that it might be really helpful to me, and maybe to a few others, if I were to articulate each week the thoughts that are going on in my mind regarding the process of that week. And so for some this might be an exciting journey. For others you might immediately start to think, well, that's too much commitment for me, or too much information for me, and tune out. So my apologies if this process isn't beneficial for you, but I do actually think it will. Many years ago, I discovered a principle that, when it first came to me, made sense. It wasn't original. I heard a man speaking on the issue, but I started to think through the implications of that issue, and that then formed the most important piece of my life and the way I've tried to serve God ever since. And the idea was this, that to love somebody is to communicate worth to them. And so for a long time, I have been thinking about the theological foundations behind that idea and the implications that it has for us if God is love. And so I have been, as I've probably shared from time to time, focused on that idea for a long period of time, in the hope that one day I would have this opportunity to do this PhD. But here's the implications of that idea, in a broad sense, and then in a little narrower sense. In the broad sense, God is love. When we stand in the presence of God, we ought to experience a sense of worth, an increase in the value of our identity. But for so many of us, we are overwhelmed by our sense of worthlessness, that to come before God is to feel even more worthless. And so we follow God as an evidence, or as a response to our worthlessness. I have nothing in my life to give, but I'm so grateful that God has loved me, and if I walk with Him, then maybe my life might have some significance. And yet here's the truth that I discovered from that first principle. When you love somebody, normally they experience an increased sense of worth. When I honor someone or value them, that experience of being valued, if it's received, is received as love. And if God loves us that way, then in our hearts we ought to experience worth and significance. In the second idea is this: I have lived my life in the theological construct known as Wesleyanism. For most of my life, or for a big portion of it, not most of it, I was unaware that that was the case. I just thought I was a Christian. But the Christian heritage that I'm a part of received its momentum from the works and efforts and observations of John Wesley back in the 1700s. And he reasoned that it was consistently true through the history of the church that the most profound experiences of God were experiences of love, and that God indeed wanted to fill our hearts with perfect love, as evidenced in the Sermon on the Mount. And not only did God desire to do that, but it was possible that humanity, with all of our frailty, with all of our weaknesses, with all of our failures, to be transformed at the very core of our being, so that our lives were motivated by the love of God. And I started putting those two ideas together, and I started to reason that if I am transformed at the core of my identity by love, then at the core of my identity I ought to experience worth. But there's a problem with that for myself personally, and for everybody that I've ever met. When we're put in the right set of circumstances that feels devaluing or demeaning, our hearts move towards that sense of worthlessness. And then it occurred to me, when Adam and Eve sinned, they broke relationship with God. God, who is is intended as the shaper of identity, was cut off. And so the experience of humanity from that time since has been that existential question, that who am I? What is my life for? Why am I here? Because I can't innately sense it within myself. And that's the lostness, is disconnectedness from God. And so if Wesley was right and God fills our hearts with love, then one of the foremost indications of that ought to be a transformation of our hearts at the sense of worth. And is it possible that our own innate sense of shame and worthlessness blocks that process? So in fact, we do have an experience with God. We do have an encounter with God where He fills our lives with love, but we're unaware of this transformational process that has to do with the transforming of our minds, so that we see ourselves in that light. And that's been the question that I've been struggling with for a number of years, and coming to answers, as you probably no doubt understood through through the things that I've said across the years. But to have the chance to study that in the intensity of a PhD has been my goal. You see, there are certain psychological observations that I believe correlate to our theological observations, and if we very, very deliberately connect those things together, it may be true that the experience of God transforming our lives is realized in a sense of a new understanding of who we are, of how we relate to God, and how we relate to the world around us. Is it possible that the church could be incredibly more effective if we understood ourselves in terms of the transformed being, discovering the worth and the richness of our lives, and then attempting to communicate that to others? So that's my PhD. That's the focus. And I'd like to invite you on a journey as each week I try and grapple a little bit with a concept that might be revealing of that truth. Come along with me if you will. Thanks for watching.